Most of the artists, including established artists with solo exhibitions, cannot make a living from their artistic practice. But at the same time, there's more than enough money in the art world because money wants what it cannot buy, and art just happens to be something that's not available. And so why is it so hard for artists to sell their art? Why are most artists starving and doomed for a life of poverty? And what's the solution to all of this? To make it easy, I've categorized this video into 4 categories. Why bad artists think they're really good, the saturation levels of the art market, the mindset of artists, and the alternative. So let's start with why bad artists think they're really good. Now, the first problem that we are facing in this dilemma is something that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which states that people with low competence levels in a particular domain greatly overestimate their ability in that particular domain. In other words, it states that some people are simply too dumb to even realize how dumb they really are. There's this famous example of a man who wants to rob a bank and reads that invisible ink is made with lemon juice. So he comes up with the plan to cover his face in lemon juice so his face would not be visible on the security cameras of the bank when he would rob the bank. Needless to say, when he tried to rob the bank, his face was visible and he obviously got arrested afterwards. Now, you might think, why didn't he test out this hypothesis first and cover his face with lemon juice and then film himself before actually deciding to rob the bank? Well, turns out he actually did that. He covered his face with lemon juice and took a selfie of it, and lo and behold, he couldn't see his face on the picture. And so he thought that it worked. What he didn't realize was that the picture wasn't developed properly, and so he was clearly too dumb to understand how dumb he really was. And the sad truth is that we see these phenomena a lot in the art world as well. That 2 artists who are too dumb to understand that they are not good enough to do portrait art and make things like this for their clients, or restoration artists who don't understand that they are not good enough to restore $1 million antique painting and come up with things like this. And so what's happening here? Why are these people not capable of seeing that they're not good enough? Well, the truth is that we are all not capable of seeing those things. If you look at my 14-year-old dreams, for example, it's very easy to see that they are completely unrealistic and at most delusional. And my 14-year-old self was not able to realize how unrealistic those dreams were. And so my 14-year-old self was simply too dumb to realize how dumb he really was. Now, the reason that that is not a problem for most of us is that we can simply ask our friends what they think of our plans, what they think of our dreams, and those friends are usually honest enough to say that we are crazy, that it will never work, and bring our feet back to the ground. And this is not possible when it comes to robbing a bank, for example. You cannot ask your friends for their opinion because they might call the cops. And in the art world, it's the same, but slightly different. Sure, you can ask feedback of people about your art, but art is so subjective that nobody can prove with objective arguments that your idea or your art is bad. And because of that, there is no way for incompetent people to realize that they are incompetent. And if you're an incompetent artist, then you're not going to make money with your art. And so that's the first reason why artists cannot seem to make money with their art. They are simply not good enough to know that they're not good enough. Some artists are even not good enough to press the like button on my videos. It's a vicious cycle that you should break by pressing the like button right now. It helps a lot with the algorithm, so thank you very much. Let's move on. The second thing that we have to talk about is supply and demand and the saturation levels in the art market. You've probably heard that supply and demand is fairly important when it comes to building a business. You ideally want to develop a business in a marketplace where there's not a lot of supply but a huge demand. And you probably also know that the art market is fairly saturated and that there's quite a lot of competition in that field, which makes it much harder to find art buyers for your art. And so I'm not going to bother you with the things that you already know in this chapter, but I am going to cover one thing about supply and demand situation that you probably do not know. Let's first compare the art world to the world of sport. When it comes to football, for example, everyone knows that it is nearly impossible to become a football player that gets paid huge sums of money. Now, what most people don't realize is that in the art world, that is even more impossible than in the world of football because of the subjectivity in the marketplace. And so what happens in an objective marketplace like football, for example, is the following. First, you dream of becoming a football player at the age of 8. And then somewhere down the line, at the age of 14, for example, you see that there are other kids who are objectively way faster than you, and you realize that with the biological build that you have, you simply will never be as fast as them no matter what you try. And so at the age of 8, everyone wants to be a football player. But at the age of 24, almost nobody wants to become a football player anymore because they know with certainty that they can't. This is simply not true in the art world. In the art world, there are as many people who want to become artists at the age of 15 as there are people who want to become artists at the age of 28. Because in the art world, you are never confronted with the fact that you are not good enough, with the fact that you might be incompetent. And so we kind of have the same problem as in the first chapter, but in this case, it's creating more saturation, leading towards more competition, leading to less money for artists. And so this is the first reason for the saturation levels to be this high in the art world. But there's one more reason why the art market is way more saturated than even the most famous sport on this planet. The art market is the only marketplace on this planet where the saturation levels increase infinitely over time. Because as an artist, you don't only have to fight against people who are alive and are making paintings. No, you also have to fight against people, artists that are dead and are already very much established. And the longer the art market exists, the more dead artists become part of that secondary market, meaning that the amount of supply of great artists increases and increases and increases. And so when you're an artist, you are dealing with a different type of saturation, which makes it extremely hard to sell art. The third reason artists are not able to sell their art online has something to do with the mindset of creatives and the difficulties that are connected with selling itself. First, we have the mindset of the romantic ideal, which is problematic. We are talking about an ideal of the starving artist, an artist completely detached from society, and because of that has a unique perspective on that society. Now, the problem with this ideal is that it suggests that starving and being misunderstood is a requirement for being a great artist instead of a problem that needs to be solved. And of course, this ideal is complete BS and results in quite a lot of damage for artists. Artists who believe in this romantic ideal start to hate the idea of asking for anything. Somehow they think that the moment you start to ask, you are a sellout, and it starts with simple things like, for example, asking your audience to like your videos, which is something that you should be doing right now. It helps a ton and celebrates our favorite color as artists, namely like button blue. Now, the moment you understand how hard it is and how impossible it is to sell your art, you understand that you simply cannot afford this hostile perspective on selling. This romantic ideal is not just destructive, it's career ending. Artists who think that selling is for sellouts are confusing moral purity with stupidity. And in a marketplace where selling is nearly impossible, having a hostile perspective on selling is stupidity itself. I mean, what can I say? It's romanticism infused with ignorance. Another problem lies in the personality traits that make up a good salesperson, because the truth is that selling is extremely hard. Let's say you want to have gallery representation, for example. Well, in order to get that, you will have to go towards galleries and mingle with those types of people. You will have to present your art and pitch your art towards them, and you will likely have a 99 to 100 failure ratio. And the rejection that you will be getting is not a fun type of rejection. It's not a no thanks type of rejection, but a no thanks and never bother me again, get the fuck out of my gallery type of rejection. And the couple of galleries that might show interest will either be too small, where your time will be better spent on social media anyway, or they will already be mid-level type of galleries, meaning that their exhibitions are likely going to be fully booked for the next year or 2 years in advance. Now, if they're interested, they might say something like, well, come back in a couple of weeks or months, and then you will have to follow up. Now, following up is extremely easy for organized, conservative personality types, but for the rebel, creative type of person, following up is extremely hard because they don't have any systems to follow up. And so as a result, following up most of the times never happens with them. And in the gallery world, following up is a long process with many follow-ups, of which most lead towards nothing. And so you're constantly asking yourself, why the hell am I even doing this? Now, let's say the gallery will actually be interested in you, the artist. Well, then they first have to know you a bit better and see if you would be a good fit personality-wise to collaborate with. And they also need to see if they can sell your art. Meaning that they will put you in a group show or take you to an art fair or something like that and hang one of your works there for a couple of days, perhaps for one day, and see how it does. Now, during this process, you will not see any money. And in the best case scenario, you will sell a couple of pieces which will not keep you alive or anything like that. And on top of that, this process will take a couple of months at the very minimum, but might as well turn into a year or more depending on the problems that the gallery is facing at that moment. And then if they finally decide to put you in a solo show where you might actually make some real money, you will have to wait again. Because as I said, these mid-level galleries have agendas that are fully booked for over a year, sometimes 2 years or more, meaning that your solo show will be planned 1 or 2 years ahead of time. And so all in all, in the best case scenario, your sales process to get one solo show will be a process that will likely take several years at the very minimum. Now, if you compare the sales process with, for example, selling a cheap in-demand product direct to consumer, then you see huge differences. Selling direct to consumer doesn't have these insane waiting lines of years. It doesn't have these rejection patterns. It doesn't have these extroverted facets to it. And you get feedback from the customer immediately after the sale or during the sales process. You know directly what to change and how to move forward, and you know directly where you are at. And so those direct to consumer sales processes are much easier. It doesn't take years to learn that your product isn't good enough or anything like that. And so once you understand how hard this sales process is, you understand that you need an extreme amount of perseverance, you need conscientiousness, you need to be organized, and you will benefit heavily from extroverted personality traits. Some might even say that you have to be an extrovert in order to have a chance of success. And many artists don't fit this personality profile because the irony is that the artistic lifestyle, a lifestyle of working long hours alone in your studio, is something that attracts predominantly introverted people. And even if you're fairly extroverted, the loneliness that comes with this lifestyle will make you much more introverted and push you constantly towards introversion. And so the artistic lifestyle, ironically, pushes you towards selling less. And so the question becomes, what do you do about this? Can you become this extroverted super personality in order to succeed? Probably, but how would you do that? How do you develop thick skin to withstand years of rejection? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. If you do, please let us all know in the comment section, because I can definitely use a thicker skin myself as well. Let's move on to the last chapter of this video, which is dominated by one of my favorite questions. What's the alternative? By now it's probably pretty obvious to you that most artists will not sell art because they cannot sell art and don't know it, because their art is not good enough, because the marketplace is too saturated, because they don't have the personality type, or because of a mixture of all of these things. And because of this, some artists don't even try to market their art. And you can ask yourself, what's worse? Developing a revolutionary artwork and never marketing or selling it, or never have made the revolutionary artwork in the first place? For your mental state, not selling your art is probably worse than not having made art in the first place. Because not selling your art means that you now have art in your home that reminds you not of the joy and beauty of your creative practice, but of the struggle and rejection of your creative practice. It reminds you of not being good enough. It reminds you of people not wanting you. It reminds you of being perceived as a failure by society. It's like having a massive ugly breakup where your girlfriend cheated on you with your best friend. If that happens to you, you don't want her stuff lying around the house for the next 5 years. Because if you remind yourself of this negative traumatic experience for 5 years straight, you end up in a pseudo-depression where you lose all trust in other people. And so you don't want her stuff lying around in the house. But removing that stuff from the house is not as easy as it sounds, because deep inside, you kind of want to give her another chance. You want to hold on to it. And when it comes to your art, it's even harder. What are you gonna do? Are you really going to get rid of your unsold art? Are you really going to get rid of 10 years of work, your life's work, just so that you could feel better about yourself? Of course not. Who would ever do that? And so as a result, you live with 500 unsold pieces that remind you of the 10 years where you wasted your life away. And so the alternative to selling is horrible and can cause serious inner mental trauma. And it doesn't stop there. The negative impact of not selling doesn't stop with yourself. There's also a societal impact that we need to take into account. Here's the thing. Art is the only necessity in the world, and so by not selling, you deprive others of the most important and beautiful thing in the world, namely art. Now, you might be thinking by yourself that is complete BS, that art is not the most important thing in the world. Food, for example, is more important, love is more important, air is more important. Now, if you think that, then you are of course completely fucking wrong. Art is the only necessity in the world and is of course more important than food. Let me explain what I mean with that. If you look at what people do after they come home from their job, you will see that they watch a movie, that they watch Netflix, go to a theater play, listen to music, go to an exhibition, read a book, play video games, etc., etc., etc. Now, all of the things I just mentioned are of course created by artists. People consume way more art than they consume food or anything else. When people have a choice, they will always choose to consume art. As a matter of fact, even when people choose to consume food, they still choose art, because usually before they start eating, they first put their favorite Netflix show on. And so the food becomes a side dish to the art that they are watching. That's how important storytelling is. Art is the only necessity. Food sustains your life, but art gives you a life in the first place. Without art, there is nothing to sustain. Without art, food is useless. And so what's the alternative to not selling from a societal perspective? Well, the alternative is that nobody benefits and enriches their lives with the most important thing in the world. The alternative is that people are starving culturally, which is of course catastrophic. A life without art is the worst life imaginable, and we don't even have to imagine it. You can just look at one of the biggest sociology experiments done in history. They once did an experiment where they took millions of people and deprived their society of culture for hundreds of years to see what happened. The research is called the Dark Ages, and it's vastly recognized as the most horrible time in human history. A life without culture is the worst life imaginable. And so what's the alternative to not selling your art? Well, the alternative is the worst life imaginable. Now, in order to make this video complete, we should end in a positive note. We should help solve this problem, and the best way to solve this problem is of course not to get rid of 500 of your unsold pieces. The best way to solve it is to simply learn how to sell them. And so we should be talking about that and answer some of the questions you might have around selling your art. How to find art collectors for your art. How to sell your art through social media, Instagram and other platforms, where or what are the best places to sell your art, etc., etc., etc. But that would be another 15 minutes and frankly, a completely different video or several completely different videos. And so I'm very sorry, but we are not going to do that. Predominantly, because I already did. I made a whole playlist where I answer all of these questions for free. A playlist that you could be listening to in the background while you're making art in your studio, for example. Hope to see you there. Ciao, ciao.